Okay, so Monster Hunter Rise came out on Friday, and I had been in and out of the Monster Hunter series for a while. I think the last one that I really got into was Monster Hunter Freedom on the PSP. I didn't play the PS2 version of it. I had seen it occasionally on store shelves at like GameStops and EB Games and all this, but I never really picked it up and tried it. The PSP version was a lot of fun. I thought it made sense as a handheld game, and since then, I've occasionally checked out some of the new releases, but Monster Hunter World came out, which has ended up being Capcom's most successful game release ever at this point, and it really catapulted the Monster Hunter series into more mainstream status. So I played about 15 hours of Monster Hunter World, had fun there, and here we are now with Monster Hunter Rise. And I said, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot one more time, and we're going to see how this goes. And yeah, it's very, very good. I'm actually having a lot of fun with Monster Hunter Rise. I want to talk to you guys here about it today and some of my impressions and thoughts on it so far. If you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, really helps out. And if you're new to the Spawn channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So the first thing you're going to notice when you turn this game on, it very likely is the best looking Switch game. Like, definitely the best looking third-party Switch game, but you can certainly put this one up against Nintendo's own first-party lineup, especially with the overall scope of the game, and there's no load screens between different areas. Basically, you load in once, and then you can run all around the map. And some of the locations are really cool looking. Some of the large monsters that become more and more intricate as you play through the game are very impressive, especially when you have it in handheld mode, and you're kind of just sitting there in awe watching two of these large creatures fight each other. The animations are really, really good in motion there. It is something to see. It is pretty impressive. And I think what this really shows is just how flexible that RE engine is. I mean, we just had Ghosts and Goblins on the Switch using it. We had all the Resident Evil like remakes using it. Now here we are with Monster Hunter Rise using it on the Switch. And Capcom really came up with an awesome engine that they continue to innovate and work with. And I'm excited for the future of this engine as they go along here, especially I assume they're going to use this in like the next Monster Hunter World. And it's really, really cool looking though to see it on the Switch. And Monster Hunter Rise, like I said, Capcom must have spent a lot of time just refining it and making sure everything worked well on the Switch, because even the frame rate is pretty much steady across the board. I mean, we were playing online. It was me, Sean, Nate, and Jay, so it was pretty chaotic. It was like us against a couple of larger monsters that came together, a bunch of smaller monsters, and, you know, numbers are flying up all over the screen. Stuff's exploding everywhere. And I'll admit, the frame rate really didn't get hit much at all. I was, again, pretty impressed. Now, the gameplay loop is pretty straightforward, and it's essentially explained in the title. It's Monster Hunter. You hunt monsters. Like, that's the big thing. And the idea here is you're going to go through, you're going to hunt monsters, you're going to defeat them, and then you're going to take parts from them and use it to craft better armor and better weapons. And that's essentially it. And really, the story is about that as well. Like, there's nothing crazy in terms of twists or anything that I've come across, and I think I'm getting close to the end of the game. And the idea is, even after you beat the game, there's still an immense amount of content, just trying to do the end game stuff, getting the best armor, playing with your friends online, working out skill trees and like these weapon trees for all of these different weapons, because there are a lot of weapon combinations in the game, and like an overwhelming amount. I'd recommend when you're playing through it to just kind of focus on one, and then when you get to the end game, you can start looking back at some of the other ones, because the play style between these different weapons it's large. Like, you could go from a third-person shooter with like the guns or the bow and arrow to being an all-out hack and slash. It definitely changes up the gameplay styles to where it's more purposeful when you're using a melee weapon, and that's something that probably won't sit well with everyone. Essentially, you may find yourself ahead of the game. So you might be swinging a sword and it's taking your hair to a while, and you're like, no, I gotta turn, I gotta do this, I gotta dodge, and you're kind of stuck for a minute. And that's something that I always found myself kind of frustrated with these Monster Hunter games when you first get into them. But you will quickly learn from this game as you're playing it and kind of adapt and realize what you can and can't do against certain monsters and at certain times. And that's just part of the learning curve. I mean, really, Monster Hunter will punish you until you start learning about how these different weapons work and which monsters you're going up against, because you have different elements to deal with. You have faster weapons, slower weapons, ranged weapons. You can do all kinds of stuff with items as well that you collect and craft. So really, the situation with these monsters is just how you set it all up. You could even try to lure them to different spots, try to have them fight against other monsters, and You can even try to damage them to the point where you can ride one monster to attack another or just throw them into a wall. I really like all the options that you have in this game to kind of tackle and defeat these different monsters. You can even try to capture them and you get better stuff for doing that. And while we're on the topic of riding these different monsters, which is like one of the newer things you can do here, I really like the Wirebug. See, one of the issues I've always had with Monster Hunter is the movement at times feels pretty slow. Like, you're not that agile in the game, at least until now. The Wirebug is something that I hope they continue to take forward in newer Monster Hunter games, because it has completely changed Monster Hunter as we know it. I mean, the ability to essentially grappling hook yourself around doesn't sound like a big deal. Like, when they were first telling me about it in like the trailers, I was like, I mean, that's kind of cool. But then you start using it in different and interesting ways, whether it's to dodge like a monster that's charging straight at you. You can literally zip right up and out of the way. You can essentially grappling hook between large cliffs to traverse the world you're in. Like, there's so many cool things. And then they also worked in the combat where you would use a Wirebug with your different weapons to spring above a monster and crash down with a longsword, or tie him up with the double blades and have this nice large number pop above them. It's really cool, and it's probably my favorite addition so far in like the entire franchise is this Wirebug. It sounds so basic, right? It's like, oh, it's a grappling hook, but yeah, it just changes everything. Now, they do have a few other things. They have like Rampage, where you'll essentially almost tower defend certain things against larger monsters, set up different like ballistics, and you'll just try to shoot them as they come in and fight them. And I mean, it's different, it's interesting, right? It's kind of cool to do that, but I think the core loop that I am really enjoying is legitimately just going out hunting these monsters. You see yourself become stronger as you do it, and when you play with friends, you end up with larger damage sponges essentially of different monsters, but it's a lot of fun to tackle them with your friends, and I'm really happy that the online is good. Like, I think that they mentioned it's rollback, netcode, all that. Like, it's very, very smooth. I didn't deal with any kind of disconnection issues, and we played for several hours actually when we were doing Sean's video, and we didn't have an issue at all. It was a ton of fun and not frustrating. I was a little concerned when the demo came out because there were some issues there, but it seemed like they just worked everything out for the actual release of the game. Now, you will do things other than just fight monsters the entire time. They do have resource gathering, whether it's plants or different like bones. They have like fossils thrown in there, some rare materials you may find in certain caves, for example. So there's always a push to explore the area while you are hunting a monster or taking on a quest where you are collecting. And they knew that that's what they wanted you to do, because they give you a Palamute immediately. Like, you're just kind of riding around on this dog all the time, and it's pretty cool to get around that way. Otherwise, though, it's a little slower riding around on foot because your stamina is also affected. And they added in the nice little ability to do things like sharpen your blade or heal yourself or eat things for stamina while you're riding on your dog, maybe tracking a monster or collecting different resources. Also, while this one does appear more approachable than the Monster Hunter games we've had in the past few releases, you're still going to run into a learning curve. All right, and that's the thing that could, I think, put people off of this game. And it's because you'll run into like menu after menu after menu. You'll find tutorials even after 10 or 15 hours in the game, just kind of walking around checking things out. And I will say, I don't think they explain some things well enough. For example, when you're going through your different trees for creating weapons and armor, I don't think it's explained enough to how you get to certain things, why things are blocked off, why things are question marks, how you unlock them. And there's like a whole nother tab for upgrades, but I'm already upgrading the item on this tab. Why is there another tab? And there's just a lot of navigation of menus in Monster Hunter. And it's kind of all this information you're trying to figure out while they're also piling other information on top of you that can be kind of overwhelming, especially if you're someone who's never played a Monster Hunter game. My recommendation is try out just fighting some of the monsters and occasionally go back and look through the different menus, and mostly just work on your armor and your weapons first. And then as you get kind of acclimated to that menu, move on to some other menus, because like they just want you to start looking at everything all at once and you'll start forgetting things. And it's just, again, overwhelming for people who probably just want to go out and just slay monsters. But for people who stick around long enough and figure everything out, there is an awesome game here to play, and I think it's one that will keep you busy for a long time, especially if they continue to do the updates that they have been talking about, where they'll add in different monsters and who knows, maybe entirely new maps. It seems like the game's off and running and selling very, very well, where we're having reported sellouts take place in Japan and even across the US right now from what I've seen online. I think Capcom's going to stick with this one for quite a while, so I'm looking at a game that's 100 hours plus, no problem for most people who get really interested and invested in it. But let me know what you guys think about Monster Hunter Rise so far, especially if you picked it up on Friday. And I'm very curious as to people who have not really played much of any Monster Hunter before, what they think of this as maybe their first game overall in the series. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.